The most widely published book in human history reveals that we are created in the image of God. Throughout our human journey, each encounter is an opportunity to see the shared humanity in ourselves and others. Regardless of one's views on religion, each experience and each story weaves us together towards a common path. A path of transformation, a process of growth and understanding, a recognition that, at our core, we share a common destiny. What does the search for truth really mean in our lives? How can we find a sense of unity in a world so diverse and divided? As we reflect on these questions, we start to uncover a fundamental connection that binds us all beyond our differences. Welcome to Created in the Image of God, Building Vibrant Communities, with our host, Wade Franson. Tonight's episode is a woman of God.
Hey everyone, it's Wade Franson here with another episode of Created. Hey everyone, it's Wade Franson here with another episode of Created in the Image of God. On today's episode, we have an amazing guest. This is a woman who is charting. Hey everyone, it's Wade Franson here with another episode of Created in the Image of God. On today's episode, we have an amazing guest. This is a woman who is charting her own way in a unique effort to bring awareness to an issue of critical importance in the world of religion. I'd like to welcome into the studio Father Ann.
Thank you very much for having me, Wade. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today.
And it has been just amazing getting to know you in our brief conversations. I saved a lot of my questions so that I could ask them in the interview live, so the audience will be getting the answers at the same time I am. So to start with, though, as our audience knows, we like to get to know the real you, the you that God placed here on earth through your parents. So tell us a little bit about those very earliest experiences that you had as a child, who your parents were, where they came from, the circumstances of your origin, your creation story.
Yes, thank you. So I was born in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. I am an East Coast girl all the way. And my father actually grew up part of his life in Italy and came over as an immigrant. My mother was the child of two immigrants, Italian and Irish. You know, they came over at the same time at that time in our history. And so two Catholic countries, Italy and Ireland, but I really wasn't raised Catholic. My parents left the church when I was really little. So I really don't have any memories of, except for going to First Communion and confession, First Reconciliation. We really didn't grow up in a religious household. I have three brothers, two older, one younger. And I would say that me being born into a family that had a lot of males in it shaped me at a very deep level. I always played with them and their friends, often the only girl. And I think that will shed light for people on how it is I came to be who I am much later, which I didn't realize at the time. I would say, I love the way you phrased the question, you know, how, I guess I interpret it to, you know, what parts of my parents am I? And my father is extremely smart. He was very driven in his younger years, and he was extremely curious. My mom, very sensitive. And I think that very sensitive, she passed away suddenly when I was 14. That was really, the signature event of my young life was her very sudden passing. She suddenly died. And yeah, thank you. It really did shatter my family. My parents were divorced, but that death just shattered us. I mean, I would say I don't think we ever got over it, even all these years later. And I would say the two of them together, how different, really different they were. in retrospect, as I look back through the lens of who I am now and what I'm doing, I see the reformer in my father and the priest pastor in my mother, the sensitive, merciful, really kind and gentle person that my mother was, to an extent that I think she really struggled in the world because it's so hard, and she just felt everybody's pain. And my father being so stubborn and so strong and, unbendable by the world, just honored his integrity always. And I did inherit, I think, a mixture of those qualities, at least to a certain extent.
Well, those are both, incredibly strong, powerful in their own way, personality types and attributes, characteristics, virtues, qualities, gifts of the Spirit.
Yes.
And it must have been amazing to have that juxtaposition. I mean, in that sense, I'm so sad. Divorce is tragic, right? I can imagine there was some tension around those
Very
differences,
difficult.
right?
Yeah.
If and when you can merge those opposing, opposites attract, they say, right? To the degree that you can integrate those two attributes, perspectives, attribute sets, which you may have done in your own person, right? That's powerful.
It took a long time.
So are you schizophrenic?
Well, what I would say is kind of, yes. I can be filled with such deep compassion for people and such rage at them, really. So I do have to work a lot through my emotions and my feelings. Yeah, I guess I'm also too what you would call a late bloomer. I really didn't come into myself until much later in my life, I think because of the experience of my childhood. And it was chaotic in the sense of any children out there of divorce, being shuffled between the two places. They have entirely different dynamics, entirely different cultures. So with my mom, where it was much more easygoing, and then to my father's, where it was much more strict, it did make me a chameleon of sorts. I can really blend and handle a lot of situations, at least on the surface, easily. But it contributed a lot too, I think, to, wanting to be the peacemaker. I was really shy as a kid, incredibly shy because of the tumultuousness within the house. And at the time, as I was going through it, it seemed so burdensome and like a curse. But of course, as I grew older, I came to see just how many gifts came from it. But at the time, it just doesn't feel that way at all. Yeah.
No, I can so relate to that. My own story, my audience knows. I think I might have shared some with you of divorce and domestic kidnapping, separated from both parents. I can relate, and that whole late bloomer thing, maybe arrested development is one way to refer to it, but a complexity is then also created, and I mean that in a good way, right?
Yes.
A depth and a complexity, right? So I have to ask though, you mentioned that they were divorced. You mentioned that they left the church. Did the divorce play into that? Is that part of why? Because you can't get divorced, right? You need the Catholic Church's permission. I forget what the term is, that probably
annulment.
You need an annulment. So is that part of the reason, do you think, or do you know?
You know what? I don't think so. I've never asked, I will admit, but my understanding is my father was the firstborn in his family. And in Italy, that means something. I don't know if it still does today, but it did, firstborn. It's a cultural thing in many cultures, firstborn male. And so I think at a certain point, he really just felt that the church it just didn't provide him with anything of value, I would say. I mean, he considered himself still spiritual, but what's interesting about that is, so I went through First Communion and First Reconciliation, they're together. And then I didn't have anything between First Reconciliation, which is a grammar school, and then confirmation at 16. My father still wanted me to get confirmed, even though he had left. which tells you the power of the sacraments within the culture of the faith. But for, you know, I think for him, he had left already, but they did get married in the church. My mother, from what my oldest brother shared with me, this happens a lot, a new priest came into the parish, and I guess from her perspective, he wasn't very kind to her as a divorced person, but also he's cultivated relationships with certain people and not others. And she basically felt abandoned. So she left. And I think that was hard because she was a faithful Catholic.
So as you were then going through these experiences, where did your own desire for that connection to God and the church, spirituality, where did that take root and how did that develop?
It came much later. So although I was confirmed at 16, as I mentioned, I soon after graduated from high school, went off to college, had no sense of faith whatsoever, did not hang around with people. None of my friends had any faith. I played sports. That was important to me in high school and even at the start of college. And college was also very difficult. You might identify with this, coming out of the childhood experience and then suddenly finding yourself alone, on your own, so to speak. Those were some difficult years. So fast forward, and then
where did you go to college?
I went to Boston College, and my degree was in English. I sort of had no direction, honestly. And what's funny is that is a Jesuit Catholic college. So I consider myself to be a female Jesuit, and I never even stepped foot in the church there. So that will tell you how far I have traveled. And I basically had an encounter with God I was 29, and I wouldn't have described it that way. Really it was very physical. It was a very physical feeling of experiencing this being, the creator. And from that point forward, I was managing a band at the time, living in San Diego. And from that point forward, I couldn't really understand what was happening to me. And I didn't have anyone to discuss it with. So I started to seek in secret. And, kind of, I can expound on whatever you would like to hear, but to make a long story short, it eventually, I tested like some different faiths and, sat with some Buddhists and read New Age spirituality and went to non-denominational churches. And I even went to a Catholic church, and I just really couldn't connect. And the strangest thing happened, and all the time, this was happening over probably a year, 18 months. I was just experiencing this overwhelming sensation of a being that was trying to connect with me, but I didn't know how to pray. And a girlfriend of mine that I went to graduate school with in San Diego, she emailed me that she was Protestant. She was going into the rite of Christian initiation for adults. She was becoming Catholic. And it was so strange, Wade. After all this seeking and really, it would keep me up at night, the experience of God calling me, trying to get God had my attention, but I didn't know how to communicate. As soon as I saw the words RCIA, I knew that was the answer. And immediately the next day went down to the local Catholic church, enrolled in that program. And that's when I started to become officially Catholic. I received the sacraments. So I didn't receive them at Easter like you do when you're brand new, but that was the beginning. It was really the first time I sat in a room with people and talked about God. And then from there, my band, we relocated to Portland, and we moved half a mile away from the Jesuit parish. And that's really, the Jesuits taught me to pray. So finally, I was able to connect with God, and the relationship actually began. And it created such an upheaval in the best way in my life. I left the band. I started devoting all of my time to prayer. For 2 years, I didn't really have a quote unquote real job. I prayed for half the day. I volunteered with the parish. I didn't have an apartment, so I kind of would go from place to place.
Well,
so
let's hold that thought, because now we're into that transition phase, which we'll do in the next segment.
yes.
So we're going to go to a commercial break real quick. And when we come back, we'll have more about Father Ann and her transition period up in Portland, Oregon, getting into the meat and potatoes of what this show is about today. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
Enter the ancient tapestry of Israel's prophetic legacy. Enter the ancient tapestry of Israel's prophetic legacy with the Coming of the Glory book series. Volume 1 unveils the foundational pillars of Israel's history, from the patriarch Abraham to the prophetic mantle carried by Elijah. Volume 2 immerses you in a world of turmoil and revelation, where prophets like Jonah, Amos, Isaiah, and Jeremiah stand as beacons of courage. Volume 3 delves deep into the tapestry of biblical exploration, weaving threads of insight into the enduring struggle between belief systems. Experience the triumphs and trials of the Israelite, from exile to restoration, guided by prophets and divine intervention. Embark on a quest of discovery and revelation with the Coming of the Glory series, a harmonious blend of history and prophecy. Secure your copy today.
Welcome back, everyone, to Created in the Image of God. I'm Wade Franson. We're here with Father Ann, who, when we left our hero, she was in Portland, Oregon, and she'd connected with the Jesuit. What was it? Abbey?
Yes, the local Catholic church run by the Jesuits.
The local
Jesuits,
Catholic
yeah,
run by Jesuits. And she was there with a band. We didn't talk about the band. I want to know about the band, but we're gonna skip over that because I'm not sure everybody else wants to know about the band. But so here you are, and you're not working. You're praying. You're volunteering at the church. Tell us about that evolution.
Even remembering it was such a strange and beautiful, exhilarating time, just coming into relationship with God. I mean, I was such a baby, and it was really the whole parish. I mean, for your listeners, your audience, if you're not familiar, the Roman Catholic Church has religious orders. The Society of Jesus, that's the Jesuits. They're one of the religious orders, and they're known for schools, but they do have some parishes, and they can be pretty special places. They can be very electric, devoted to social justice. And unlike a lot of people in the church, I had an amazing experience in the institutional church, which I think also feeds into why I do what I do. It all sort of comes together in this strange way that only God can weave. So yes, I would spend hours in prayer each day. I would get invited to pet sit at people's houses, and there would be times where I didn't know where I was going to go the day before, and I would get a phone call from someone, come and stay here. So it was a deep trust building exercise. It was the total opposite of every message that I've ever gotten, which was, you need to get your education, you need to get a job, and you need to work your 9-to-5 job every single day, which is a wonderful way to live. But it was a stripping away of all of the societal messages in order for God to be able to teach me trust, which I learned faithfully. And
well, let me just comment on what I just heard, because I just want to unpack the fact that this is our human existence, right? There's that scripture about we hold this treasure in earthen vessels, right? And the soul, the communion with God that we have is is within a temple, a body. The body is the temple, and that temple needs care and maintenance, and it has to, it has to get exercise, it has to eat, it has to breathe, it has to sleep, and all of this has to be paid for, so it has to work, and work is good. Jesus said, I work and my Father works, right? So, but this is a struggle, right? It's a constant tension. I think in the modern world in particular, to go off on a weird tangent, the whole opioid crisis, when you look into it, grew, metastasized as a result of treating pain as an illness, right? They had that little pain chart on the wall, and where are you feeling today on a scale of 1 to 10? Well, let's treat your pain, let's manage your pain, because heaven forbid we should experience any pain. Heaven forbid we should experience any suffering. Heaven forbid we should experience any stress or tension in our lives. Whereas it also says Jesus learned obedience through the things he suffered, right? So we have to vacillate between utter materialism. I have to have a 9-to-5 job. I got to work and pay. Paul was a tent maker, right? So that he wouldn't be a burden to the churches. So this is life. And it does frustrate me that so many people seem to think the purpose in life is to relieve suffering. Not that I want to rejoice, but we should rejoice in our suffering. You know what I mean? So it's this weird tension, this yin yang situation. I just thought I would throw that out there as you were describing your experience of drawing close to God and being overwhelmed with the understanding of his presence and the possibilities and the capabilities of a spiritual life.
Yeah, and I think yes, like there is a distinct difference between a voluntary suffering, if you want to say, so to speak, like this willingness to suffer for God, versus the kind of suffering that we see at the hands of these unjust systems, that create the crucified peoples, which people still get united with God through that, but God's actually trying to working so hard to try to relieve the crucifixion, and yet it's so integral to our blossoming. It's a strange paradox, really.
Well, perception is reality in that, right? Again, to go to the opioid crisis, where are you on the pain scale? Personally, okay, I'm weird, but I have not used Novocaine in any dental treatment, for 30, 40 years. I just sit in the chair and I kind of go into a Zen state.
Amazing.
And I breathe and I kind of meditate, somebody else, what a madman, what an insane idiot, scream in terror, give me morphine, right? So there's a perception issue there as to what people are willing to do. Jesus, of course, said, Father, let this cup pass. Nevertheless, your will be done. So he didn't want it either.
Exactly right.
On one level, but to your point, he voluntarily submitted. But maybe, just maybe, we're a little bit too reluctant to voluntarily suffer for the sake of somebody else or something else. Maybe we're just too quick to judge as well as to, systemic suffering, right? Nothing is perfect. It never will be, right? And I think there's also the challenge of ascribing motive and motivation behind things that just are. But I digress, and I don't mean to take you off the point.
No, not at all.
But okay, so whatever. So you are having this experience. Let's get back to you and your story.
The trust building, and it lasted for about 2 years, and then I was at St. Ignatius Parish for a total of 5 years, and it really was the bedrock of my formation in the Catholic faith. I learned a great deal from the Jesuits. There were about 20. There were 3 in the parish, and then next door was it just happened to be their headquarters for the province. So there were about 20 Jesuits there. So they really took me under their wing, but also the core of the parish just welcomed me from day one. I mean, I'm this very secular looking person. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm filled with questions. And the entire community really took me in, and I became an integral part. And it was just, I think, it was the happiest time in my life. And it was when I was in the nest, and I think as you learn more about, the journey that I am, the miles I'm traveling, I came to realize not too long ago, I've only been ordained for 3 years, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but I think I'm trying to get back to St. Ignatius, so to speak, except as a priest. That I just dream about being able to be a parish priest, to be walking with the people, to hear their confessions, to say mass with them, to do weddings and funerals and offer retreats and help them discern how God is calling them to work for justice. I mean, that is what I am built for. I can only live it out in this tiny little way because of the situation, but it's like the North Star, like God has given me this vision and keeps drawing me toward it. But it's so, I look back on those days sometimes to nourish me, because the journey is very arduous for me. And it can be greatly discouraging, which I'm sure we'll talk about in the next segment. But it was a special time, Wade. I mean, it was just a special, incredible, amazing experience. And I think, like, when people ask me, why are you doing this work? I know how good it can be. And that's the call. I mean,
so let's move on in the story, because I want to allow the audience to have more of the context that I have,
yes,
which they don't have just yet, right?
Sure. Yes.
But I will comment. I'm reflecting on this one rock on the banks of Loch Lomond in Scotland, which is about 10 feet out from the shore, that you can actually get to, or you could in the 80s, by jumping on stones to get there. And that is my prayer rock. So when I was in I'd done one semester of college for my undergrad degree in theology, and sitting out on that rock praying was where I had the kind of experience that you're talking about. I'd had some pretty dramatic experiences that led me there to be studying theology and doing this camp in Scotland. But it was on that rock where that presence became overwhelming and powerful. So as you're talking, I'm thinking of that rock.
Yeah. I mean, I can almost see it in my head, what you're saying, the vision.
Yeah.
And
you're out there at sunset, and or after dark, the campers are in bed. I'm a co-counselor, and I'm now snuck out of the tent. So I'm in the dark, actually, and the moon's out, and the stillness of the loch, and I'm just praying, and it's just this immensity. And you're saying, here I am, here am I.
So when I was at St. Ignatius, I was such an integral volunteer that I had a key, and often I would go at night. And for me, being alone in a church at night is one of the most powerful experiences. And I would do that night after night for hours. And that's what it's like, making me think of that. And I had an experience in Morro Bay similar to what you're describing, where it was a full moon, it was clear by the water, there was the rock, and I know it's like you feel so small. You feel plunged into the mystery, so small and yet so.
And yet God has a purpose and a calling.
Yes.
And you're just asking, what is it? Show me the path that I should walk.
That this vast God cares about you. It's so overwhelming. And I just wish everyone had that experience, because I do think that the world would be a different place.
Well, and that's what I'm hearing in what you describing. So that's I want to now fast forward in the story to where this is going. So you've had that experience. What next?
Yeah. So finally, once I learned how to pray, I started to hear the call to be a priest. And in the Roman Catholic tradition, the church does not allow the ordination of women as priests or even as deacons. And so it took me a while, there's the verse about testing the spirits. It took me a while, especially being so inexperienced. I knew enough to set the question aside about women because I felt it, somehow I knew it could interfere with the conversion that was going on. So I just tried to live it out the best I could, like, oh, well, maybe I'm supposed to help take care of priests, or, like there was a long process of trying to understand until I gained enough confidence in my discernment skills, which Jesuits teach, that I recognized, no, I'm hearing the Spirit correctly. And I think that's part of the problem with the teaching is that it sends the message that women cannot discern and hear they can't identify or recognize God's voice for themselves. So the institution needs to step in and tell us what the situation is. So there was a lot to work against, you know what I mean? So I lived those years at St. Ignatius. It was wonderful. I recognized, in fact, I had a call to priesthood. So what I did was I went as far as I could go in the institutional church. I got my Master of Divinity from Jesuit School of Theology, and that was really getting kicked out of the nest. That was a really tough 3 years. I almost didn't make it. It was a great school where I learned a lot, but it's a tiny little seminary, mostly Jesuits. And if you are a woman with a call to priesthood, it's rough. It's brutal. So, but I made it. Then I continued on. I worked as a pastoral associate, which is basically I was the administrator of a parish so that the priest, because of the shortage of priests, so that he could do more ministry. Also, not a great job if you're a woman who has a call to priesthood. So I kind of risen up in the parish life as far as I could go. And I just recognized, I just literally couldn't go on. I lasted maybe a year. It was a little over a year, 13 months. And I put in my notice and put my stuff in my car and left, basically. And it was an incredible community that taught me so much about what it is to be a parish turned on for social justice. It was such an important part of my formation. But I then just plunged into a darkness, like a really serious darkness of not being able to live out my call. I mean, I was feeling like I was being burned alive by the Spirit, because in Catholicism, the bedrock understanding is that God is incarnational, right? Jesus is the incarnation. And not just that Jesus reveals who God is, but reveals that aspect of God, that God loves to incarnate, in the earth, in people, in the water, that's all God is incarnating. In terms of vocation, the way that I have come to understand it through my own experience, especially, is that so God incarnates in us as us. And the vocation that God calls us to, it's not always necessarily a job. It could be anything, being a parent, being a teacher, a certain situation that you need to respond to, right? God calls you to it. It's God incarnating through you and into the world. It's a way we feel like a deep communion with God. Well, I am not able to live it out. So it's kind of like, I don't mean to be dramatic. I admit I am, but it's like a personal hell that I'm trapped in, because God is trying so hard and is so loudly calling me, and God is just trying to incarnate and cannot come through the way God is asking. And sometimes I just feel like, I don't know, I'm just going to combust into flames, so it really keeps me working toward this. So back to how I got ordained. So when I
just want to put a visual on this. I'm imagining a tree with all these branches and tons of leaf and foliage, and it's the sap and the life that's going out to every aspect. But then here's this piece that that is cut off. That wants to
Exactly.
be attached, but it's cut off.
Precisely.
It's not getting that. It's not allowed to get that.
Yes. And I want to say something about that. But before I do, so when I went into this really dark place, I mean, I couldn't find work. My whole resume the last 10 years is Catholic Church. I moved to New Mexico. I mean, like, who is going to hire this person with all Catholic Church? I mean, you don't really know what you're getting. So I had to take a temp job for not very much money, and it was a very difficult, humbling time. And I'd spent all this money on my Master of Divinity, and here I am just pretty lost. Well, I got to a point where it was winter. I'm going to tell you something funny. This is weird. My story is a little strange, I admit. It was winter and it was dark, and I watched the show Fleabag. Have you ever seen it? Okay. There's a priest character in the second season. And when I started to watch it, he's a secular guy. He has a late conversion. He swears, he drinks. I mean, he's completely secular, but in his attitude, but he's a priest. It was like looking into a mirror. And it was after I saw it that I recognized I have to do this. So what are my options? Become Episcopalian, or there is something called the Roman Catholic Woman Priest Movement. Started 20 years ago, male bishops ordained women as priests. The next year as bishops, those women have been ordaining women as priests and bishops since. So that I went through that option because at least it still claimed a relationship to Rome. So
let's break here, and when we come back, I want to dig into that a little bit and have you explain the mechanics of that, how it works, and how it's working for you. So I hope everyone else in the audience is loving this as much as I am. This is actually a pre-recorded show. I should have mentioned that because there's probably audience chat coming in here, and I will be in the studio and we will see it and comment on much of that. But please keep those comments coming in. When we come back, we'll dig into a little bit more about this variation, this hybrid version that Father Ann is talking about. Don't go anywhere.
Middle Tree got started by a group of educators who wanted to see education done in a different way.
Socioeconomic status is the primary factor in whether a person is admitted to college at present. And we think that that is simply, unfair. And so our mission is to work against that by allowing people from less privileged backgrounds access to the tools that people from more privileged backgrounds are able to have.
The programs that we offer here are tutoring, college counseling, ACT and SAT test prep, and our summer seed program. The tutoring program is unlike any other on the planet that I'm aware of in that we allow students to be here on a membership basis. Students can come as often as they'd like to without an appointment, and they can be here for as long as they want to.
I really like helping kids understand things that they have been told that they're not good at.
In 6th grade, that's when I noticed my grades started to go up, especially in math. That's usually where I need my help.
I prefer to be able to just have fun with the kids in a way that inspires them to want to learn more and to have fun while they're learning.
The way they do it here, they just have that vibe, if they make it fun.
We don't have a system here, we don't have a workbook, we don't have an actual program. We have individual students, and we approach each and every individual student as individuals.
I love to go finish my homework so I can go home, chill, and just play video games or something like that.
What Middle Tree did for me was it gave me back my time after dinner or before dinner to do things with my son that let me be mom. It gave me back my mom time.
I came here and I finished the year with a B in math, which came up from an F, which I totally think is because of this place. I had A's and B's completely.
We really want to make sure that we're reaching people on their levels.
If you don't understand something, they will help you until you feel comfortable with it.
I like to empower my students to use their voices.
They want you to ask questions, and they want you to learn better than you ever did before.
really all we really want are for our kids to be healthy and happy. And I think Middle Tree embraces each kid being their best self, being their individualized self.
Welcome back to Created in the Image of God with Father Ann tonight. And we were just learning about how she had come to a dead end, let's say, and found a path forward to fulfill her calling as she saw it from God. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about how this wormhole that you now went through to get where you needed to be.
Image. I love that. I'm going to use it. It's like, the Spirit just never stops laboring to create ways for us, to live out and build God's dream. I love that. Yes. So I had learned about the movement in seminary and had gone to a mass, but I'll just be honest and say I never really saw myself reflected in it. And so I went through, I decided to become ordained. It was an incredible, I had to do a little bit more formation. COVID hit, so the ordination got delayed, but ultimately rented the space at the Episcopal Cathedral in Albuquerque. So it was very Catholic feeling. Invited different denominations to celebrate. So a lot of different Christian pastors were present in solidarity. And it was beautiful. I was one of the happiest days of my life, even though it was, I would say this is the happiest and saddest day of my life, because when a woman gets ordained in the Roman Catholic tradition, it's actually considered a crime. So the church has a body of laws. It's considered a crime as serious as the sexual abuse of a child by a priest. So, but those priests that suffer from pedophilia do not get excommunicated. Okay, so just to put it in perspective, we get excommunicated automatically. So it was an amazing day. I knew that I was doing the right thing. I was in alignment with God's invitation, what God is asking. And I was receiving the harshest punishment. So like your image of the tree branch, that's what it is. They cut you off. It's not as if I haven't left. People will say that, why, you've left. I haven't left. This is my way of reforming, being present to do the reform work. So I'm so present to it this year. It's been 3 years since my ordination. And, I went to Ash Wednesday this past Wednesday, and man, the excommunication is really meant to asphyxiate you. It's like, those weighted blankets, if you have to ever get an x-ray, it's like a mantle that just grows heavier and heavier and heavier, because I'm cut off from church life. I'm cut off from the sacraments. I'm not allowed to receive the Eucharist or have my confession heard. I can't work for the church. I can't volunteer for the church. So it sounds medieval. Oh, you're excommunicated. But really, for somebody who only wants to be in the church and to serve, for me, it's like a slow death. They are trying to kill me or make me, I had to either choose between God and the church. So of course I chose God. It really wasn't a choice.
So allow me, I don't want to interrupt the flow, but I want to just share and comment a couple of things. So my audience knows I was ordained, and I resigned from the ministry. So I was not, we did not excommunicate, we disfellowshipped. Same thing, right?
Yeah.
Same thing, right? Just
you're not wanted. You're persona.
Well, you are cut off. I mean, there was disfellowshipped, and then there was marked and disfellowshipped, right? If you were marked, that means anyone who talked to you would also be disfellowshipped. You follow me?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. that's even more extreme.
Because
terrible.
Excommunicate means no communication allowed, right? So disfellowship means you weren't allowed to attend and whatnot, but you could still have friends in theory. Not that anyone
would
who's
talk
a true believer would, but if you're marked, anyway. So the point is, I was not disfellowshipped. I walked away. Both sides wanted me. I resigned because the church, there was a schism, split right down the middle. It was a global denomination, churches in about 120 countries. I walked away from it. I separated my faith from my paycheck is what I did.
I see.
Okay. But I continued I was ordained, and I believed I had that calling. So I continued as a lay pastor, and I affiliated with one of the sides of the splits eventually. And then they split. And then I affiliated with that one. And then I was still vocal about what, I thought, but I did so in a respectful way. So it came to the point, however, where some people were complaining. I was giving sermons there, and then I wasn't, and then people complained, and then the head of this organization came to said, I respect you. I've always admired you. You've done great work, but I'm having to take the decision because of these discussions of letting you know that we're no longer accepting your ordination. You can still continue to fellowship with. So I wasn't disfellowshipped, but now I was no longer considered an ordained minister by that organization.
Yes.
And I said, I completely understand your position and I respect it. However, you didn't give me that ordination and you can't take it away. So now you have a situation where you have someone in your church who you don't think is a minister of God, who thinks he is. That may be a bigger problem. We'll see how that plays out.
Interesting.
And he said, fair enough. So long as you're not causing division,
you can stay.
Right? So, and I didn't cause division. I eventually left there as well, right? Mm-hmm. And I was in a spiritual dead end, I called it, for 10 years, that dark place where you said you were in your own personal hell. I'm just sharing that I can relate with you, but the one thing I never had to experience was the act of being disfellowshipped, being excommunicated. I can only imagine how horrible that is. And I want the audience to know that I can relate to this. It's not some medieval thing. It is, it's the church in that sense is kind of like your mother, right? And suddenly you're cut off. And I want the analogy that came to mind, however, was the prodigal son, right? And whereas God rushes out in that analogy to embrace the one who wants to return, and you're in a position of not even wanting to leave, right?
Exactly.
But now the church in this sense is not behaving like the father in the prodigal son story.
No, the church is not behaving in a way that is in integrity with what the deepest core of the faith actually teaches. It's deeply, deeply problematic.
What I will offer in this regard is, so I've talked on this show several times about how, in my opinion, the prodigal son story is Jesus. You know how Jesus, told the story of the Good Samaritan, in which suddenly the bad guy becomes the good guy, right?
Like things aren't what they appear. Yes.
Right. So he did that to try to help the Jews of his day, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, understand that God was trying to elevate their thinking and bring them forward in their spirituality and in their understanding, right? So he flipped the script. In my opinion, the prodigal son story is a flipping of the script of the Cain and Abel story. In which Cain is the prodigal son, and Abel is the bad guy in the prodigal son story.
Interesting.
Right? Abel, the faithful son, is now jealous of the bad son.
That is such a rich scripture passage. But
the reason I'm telling this is
son, yes.
So that alone is, but the reason I'm telling you this is you're now bringing to mind the fact that the father is the same in both stories. In the Cain and Abel story, Cain felt like his sacrifice was not accepted, and in fact it wasn't. His sacrifice was not accepted. But God told him, if you do well, will you not be received? Right? It's not like he was being pushed away. that was his feeling. It's like, well, no, I'm not appreciative of that particular sacrifice being done in that way. And the prodigal son knew this when he left away and wasted his father's inheritance in wine, women, and song, and ended up in the pigsty, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he then wanted to come back, and the father raced to embrace him. So would the father have done in the Cain and Abel story. The father was the same in both stories. It's just the people. But here we put the church in the role of the father. That's the problem. The church is not the father.
Yes, the church. It's so, the way that the church, well, here's the thing. It's very complicated because the church, the institutional church, simply would not exist without women. We're doing 90% of the work all around the world, and it's largely unpaid. And then at the same time, we're not allowed to fully participate. So it's extremely contradictory. And not only that, I will say from the history of this teaching, if you look back at the documents, it's rooted in this idea that women are inferior, right? Like somehow we are defective men, we're defective by God's creation. Well, what has happened recently in the Roman Catholic Church,
nothing could be further from the truth.
I know.
Everything God makes is perfect.
It's so problematic. But that's what happens when you have one group defining and creating all of the theology for hundreds of years. I mean, like, it's a problem. So, but recently, this is so hard, Wade, because it fell out of style, obviously, to speak about women and women's bodies in such a defective manner, the rise of the 70s especially. So the church is a global institution, and it had to create a different argument to justify the same teaching, which it did. And it came up with the theology of complementarity. John Paul II really developed it. He spent a lot of time developing it. And now the church has convinced women, it tells us we're so special that we can't be priests, and it's much harder to combat because it's very slippery. And so kind of to tie it back in, so for the work that I am doing, I'm a little bit unique in this movement because I wear the collar. A lot of the women don't wear the collar. I go by the title father. I'm celibate. I embrace the givenness of priesthood as it looks right now in the tradition. Doesn't mean that changes shouldn't happen, but this is my call to embody the symbol, to stretch it out with the female form, right? So that it's a continuation of the tradition, but it also has new and renewed meaning through the Spirit working through it, right? So that the work that I do in that sense, it's both so filled with blessing and extremely, extremely difficult, because the amount of rejection involved, because my primary audience really are especially the bishops. That's who I am communicating to. I mean, yes, the body of Christ, but I'm especially communicating to the bishops who hold the power. God works in me. Yes, we might have different bodies, and it's up for debate about how different or the same we are and whether it's nature or nurture, but God's Spirit works the same. God incarnates, God calls us, God is calling us, and you are obstructing it. You are going against God. So that's a lot of the work that I do, because if I walk into a room with a male priest, we are both inhabiting the same symbol. Whereas a lot of the women in the movement, which I get, because to them it has come to symbolize abuse of power, but it doesn't have to symbolize that. Like, I'm also trying to rehabilitate it as well. So there's a lot of layers to it, and there's a lot of mixed response. to be honest. You know, there's people who really get it and they understand, and they think Father Ann as a title is very clever. They really understand what I'm doing symbolically. And there are others who are deeply offended by it, who think that I'm a sellout, that I support the patriarchy, that I'm not going far enough. So and people even, you know, so that I'm kind of in this strange place of, I'm too conservative for the left, and I'm too progressive for the right. And so it really is a place of kind of spiritual homelessness. You know, the church won't accept me. I'm not progressive enough for the reform movement as a whole. And I will say the great gift of it is that I have grown so much closer to Jesus, because I am experiencing the crucifixion in that metaphorical way. So
that's exactly what was going through my mind.
Yes.
And you know, we are getting close to being out of time, and I realize that we're going to have you back.
Okay. Oh, I would love to.
Because there is so much more here to unpack. I mean, we're just really getting to know you. One of the things that I read this morning, which was rather profound, you know, there's turbulence in the world. I've coined this phrase. I think it's unique to me. My philosopher friend from Planksip, who may be in the audience tonight, it's a media company up in Canada, credits me with originality. And the saying is, we lurch forward from ditch to ditch, right?
Oh, I love that.
And so you occupy that singular place, that nanosecond of where we cross the middle of the road on our way to the other ditch, right? And that's what we're doing as a society, right? It is, you know, we've mentioned schizophrenia. Well, but you have to tack into the wind in a sailboat. If you want to get to where you're going and the wind is directly against you, you have to go left for a while. Then you have to go right. And then you have to go left, and then you have to go right. But the point is, the world is going through these convulsions right now in so many ways. And there was this profound article, and we will be talking about this more. This is a little mini sneak peek for things to come. I want to dive into this issue of identity politics. The toxic nature of identity politics, because we need unity and diversity, right? Mm-hmm. We need to celebrate diversity. We need to be able to come together in true celebration and embracing of diversity. But diversity is being used to divide and fraction, and everyone is so focused on a million different micro identities, right? You are inhabiting an identity, but you have, to me, you know, in terms of discerning the spirit, the desire to bring people together, not to just make a strident point that actually becomes divisive. You know, we would want that there would be nothing divisive about anything that you're doing,
right? And
you represent the bringing together, just like at the beginning we talked about your parents, you know. And I suspect because you mentioned you had 3 brothers. Well, guess what? I was stuck between 2 girls, and when my father and they, you know, when my sister admitted, you know, in her 50s, that she and my little sister used to plan these attacks against me and torment me and get me into trouble purposefully, and they could masterfully. I was completely a victim, completely clueless, this stupid boy being manipulated by these 2 girls, you know. And then I ended up with inheriting 3 more stepsisters, so I was surrounded by women, right?
Funny.
And then we have this divorce, and it's just, can't we all just get along? I don't want to choose between mom and dad. Why would I want to choose between mom and dad? Can't we all just get along? Can I bring these people back together, right? But to do so, you sometimes have to point out the things that are keeping people apart. And it is a fine line, and it is a slippery slope. But how to tease out the right way to celebrate identity and uniqueness while celebrating unity and diversity, that's really hard.
It is. And I think part of it is, like, I love the lurching from ditch to ditch. In a way, maybe similar, tangential way I think about it is there's always a new frontier. There's always a new frontier to go to, you know, that's what it is to be in relationship with a living God who teaches. We're always going to be students learning. So there's going to be, you know, now the LGBTQ, the trans, like there's always a new question. People with disabilities, the actual earth, animals, factory farms, you know, the air, you know, there's always something more for us to learn. And as far as the unity and diversity, it's that we're prophetic to each other so that we learn, you know, because we're always going to be blind to certain experiences because we have our social position, you know. So people, we're not the same, we're equal, but we have very different experiences, and the prophetic voice is a critical one.
Well said. Well, we are out of time for today. We will come back after this next commercial break and discuss some of the audience comments, but unfortunately, Father Ann won't be here with us because this is a pre-recorded segment, but I do promise that we will find a way to have her back on, dig into all this a little bit more, and maybe we can retain some of those questions that you might have for her, and she can answer them next time, whether live or pre-recorded again. We'll see. But I'm so grateful that you've taken the time to be with us here today to share your story and your journey. I know that everyone listening in will have gotten a lot out of it. Probably do have a million questions, and I can compile those and get those to you, and we'll deal with them in some way. But what final words do you have to leave with the audience tonight?
Well, I want to thank you for having me and for creating a space like this, because I have a sense that the people who tune into your show are hungry. They're spiritual hungry. They're hungry spiritually. And it just goes to show that all of us have the power to create a space for God to incarnate. So no matter what is going on in the world, all of us have that power always to be a channel of God's incarnation. And so the more we can give ourselves over to that, the brighter the light grows. Nobody can take that away from us.
Well, thank you. Those are powerful and very encouraging words to end on. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back, and we'll deal with some of your comments and also show you the sneak peek from next week. So, Father Ann, thank you for joining us today. We will announce how and when we'll have you back, and we will have you back.
Thank you.
Welcome to the Royal Falcon Foundation. Our curriculum and activities inspire and train adolescents through hands-on experiences, fostering growth and empowerment. Through immersive and challenging experiences, we shape young minds to think independently and develop their leadership skills. Our programs foster new friendships and unity, shaping young leaders to tackle real-world challenges with confidence. We believe in equipping the next generation with the skills to become leaders of tomorrow. Join us at the Royal Falcon Foundation and be part of a journey that empowers, unites, and inspires. Double your impact with our matching grant. Until the end of 2025, every tax-deductible donation to the Royal Falcon Foundation, up to $1,000, will be matched dollar for dollar. Visit our website to donate now or email info@royalfalconfoundation.org for more details. Together, we can make a greater difference.
Well, hello there, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that pre-recorded episode with Father Ann. We do apologize for those who showed up tonight expecting to see Gunnar Lindblom, the former mafia enforcer. Instead, you saw a completely different kind of criminal, one that was criminalized by the Catholic Church for becoming ordained as a woman from a different organization. Fascinating and rich with reflection and understanding topics and knowledge. I am going to send all these questions to Father Ann. Those segments were a little bit longer than I realized, so we really don't have time tonight to go into those questions. We will be announcing her as a returning guest in the future, and she'll be allowed to answer some of those questions at that time. There is therefore only one thing left to do for tonight, which is to share the sneak peek of next week's episode. And it's a doozy. So hope to see you all there. And thank you for being loyal supporters of Created in the Image of God. Until next week, may God be with you. Hey everyone, it's Wade Franson. I'm here with a brief sneak peek of what's coming on Created in the Image of God on April 8th on episode 145. I'm in the studio with Anne-Marie Waters. Welcome to the studio, Anne-Marie.
Hi, Wade. Thank you. Thank you for having me back.
Well, we've just been having a robust pre-recorded discussion on the fact that we live in a post-truth society. What do you mean by that term?
Well, it's that the truth doesn't matter. I don't necessarily even agree with the term. It's a term that is used as to suggest that we are in an era where truth is completely is openly disputed. You know, we can all see it with our own eyes, and yet people will deny it and be believed. It's a very strange thing. In other words, to put it more simply, we know people are lying, yet we still believe them. That's the sort of era that I see that increasingly in politics. But whether we're post-truth is another matter, because that suggests we once had the truth, that the truth was once paramount, and that the truth was once what guided us. I don't believe that it was. I think we have always been in an anti-truth society, I'm afraid.
And from my own background, I belong to a religious organization that believed we, quote, had the truth, unquote. And I think part of the issue is that people believed they had the truth before, and they claim they have the truth now, and they don't recognize the cognitive dissonance between those two truths, which they supposedly held at different times in their lives. And they don't reconcile it.
Well, I guess it depends on whether something is colored by perception, whether something is. Yeah, see, what's true is subjectively and objectively two different things, as we of course know. Subjectively, people can think something is true. It's colored by their perception, by their experiences. It's in objectivity where the real truth is found. And so, when it comes to religion or spirituality, people who belong to a faith can claim that their beliefs are true, but that's only a claim. So I'm talking about objectivity, and I'm talking about everydayness and everyday truth, which is what really happens. What does the word truth mean? It means what really happened. So my dog has just walked out of the kitchen now. If you were sitting here with me and saw her walk out of the kitchen, we would both agree objectively my dog has just walked out of the kitchen. If you say your dog hasn't just walked out of the kitchen.
It hasn't. I did not see it. I do not believe, because I don't believe you, and I don't trust you, what you're saying right now. So obviously what you're telling me is lying. I want to get at your hidden agenda and your hidden motive in telling me about this dog.
Okay, I do have a hidden agenda about the dog. It's very important that you thought, but you come on. Which is why I said
I'm illustrating the point, Anne-Marie, of
that it's objective. Though, if you were here, you would have seen the dog walk out of the room with me. We would have both seen the same thing at the same time, and it happened. She did walk out of the kitchen.
But
so
what we're going to discuss.
You said didn't. You're lying.
But what we're going to discuss is how we could be both in the same room and see it and still believe that something different happened. We're going to get into all the ramifications and how this plays out on the grand scale of ideologies and politics and policies and, lemmings chasing the latest squirrel around and off a cliff. That and much more when you tune in to Created in the Image of God, episode 145 on April 8th with Anne-Marie Waters. Be there.